Blood trickled from the corner of Vivian Owens' lip as she lay curled on the floor of their cabin, the wooden boards pressing cold against her cheek. The year was 1877, and Las Cruces, New Mexico territory, was experiencing one of the hottest summers on record. But inside this small home on the outskirts of town, the air felt as cold as death. "You lost my son," Thomas Owens hissed, towering over his wife of 3 years. His boot nudged her ribs, not quite a kick, but a threatening reminder of his power. "What good are you if you can't even carry a child?" Vivian didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The cramping had started yesterday while she was hanging laundry. By nightfall, the bleeding had begun, and by morning, her hopes of motherhood had washed away with the blood that soaked through the bedsheets. The doctor had come and gone, his sympathetic eyes the only kindness she'd received. "Answer me." Thomas's voice rose, his hand drawing back. Vivian closed her eyes, bracing for the impact that never came. The sound of a horse approaching outside drew her husband's attention away. Thomas straightened his vest and shot her a warning glance. "Clean yourself up. I've got business with the McCormick Ranch today. I expect dinner when I return." His voice had shifted to the smooth, charming tone he used with everyone but her. The man the town knew as a hard-working rancher and devoted husband. Footsteps crossed the porch and a firm knock sounded on the door. Thomas opened it to reveal a tall figure backlit by the morning sun. "Morning, Owens. Your cattle drive still set for next week." The deep voice carried the slight drawl of someone who'd spent years in the saddle. "Mitchell Morrison," Thomas responded, his tone instantly cordial. "Right on time. Let me grab my hat and we'll discuss it on the way." Vivian remained motionless on the floor as the men exchanged pleasantries. She'd never formally met Mitchell Morrison, but everyone in Las Cruces knew of him. A cattle driver turned ranch owner who'd made his fortune during the boom years after the war. He was said to be fair in his dealings and generous to those in need, qualities her husband only pretended to possess. As Thomas moved to leave, Mitchell's gaze shifted past him and locked onto Vivian's crumpled form. His expression changed instantly, eyes narrowing as he took in her bloodied lip and the way she clutched her abdomen. "Mrs. Owens?" he asked, stepping partially into the cabin despite Thomas's attempt to block his view. "Are you unwell?" "She's fine," Thomas cut in sharply. "Just took a fall while sweeping. Clumsy woman. I was just telling her to rest." Mitchell's eyes never left Vivian's face. Something in his expression told her he didn't believe a word of Thomas's explanation. "Madam," Mitchell addressed her directly, ignoring Thomas completely. Vivian's throat constricted. She'd never defied her husband in public, never revealed the truth of their marriage to anyone. But something in Mitchell Morrison's steady gaze gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. "I lost our baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This morning." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's face contorted with rage, but with Mitchell present, he couldn't act on it. Mitchell removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "My condolences, Mrs. Owens. That's a terrible burden for any woman to bear." His eyes shifted to Thomas, hardening, and certainly not something she should be blamed for. "We should go," Thomas said tightly, moving toward the door. "Vivian needs her rest and we have business to attend to." Mitchell didn't move. "I think our business can wait, Owens. Seems to me your wife needs tending to." "Doctor been by this morning," Vivian answered, slowly pushing herself up to sitting. He said it happens sometimes." "Nothing to be done," Mitchell nodded. "Still, you shouldn't be alone. Perhaps Mrs. Rodriguez from town could come sit with you." "That won't be necessary," Thomas interjected, his smile now strained. "My wife is stronger than she looks. Aren't you, dear?" The endearment felt like another blow. Vivian lowered her eyes, the brief moment of courage fading under her husband's gaze. "Actually," Mitchell said, his voice taking on a firm edge that seemed to surprise even Thomas, "I insist. I'll send my ranch hand to fetch Mrs. Rodriguez on our way. And perhaps the doctor should make another visit." Thomas's jaw worked silently, caught between maintaining his public persona and asserting control over his household. Finally, he nodded curtly, If you think it best, Vivian has always been delicate. Mitchell turned to Vivian again. Mrs. Owens, I'd like to offer my condolences properly. That wasn't your fault at all, losing the baby. Any decent doctor would tell you the same. His words were simple, but they struck Vivian like lightning. No one had ever contradicted Thomas's assessments of her failures before, especially not another man. She raised her eyes to meet Mitchell's and saw something that had been absent from her life for too long: basic human dignity. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, she managed, her voice stronger than before. Mitchell, please. He nodded respectfully. Now I'll fetch help for you before your husband and I conduct our business. Thomas's hand clamped around Mitchell's arm. That won't be necessary. I can send for Mrs. Rodriguez myself after we conclude our dealings. Mitchell glanced down at Thomas's hand until the shorter man removed it. I believe I'll handle it personally, Owens. Some matters take precedence over business. Without waiting for a response, Mitchell tipped his hat to Vivian and strode out the door. Thomas lingered, his eyes promising retribution once they were alone again. This isn't finished, he whispered, before following Mitchell outside. Vivian sank back against the wall, one hand pressed against her empty womb, the other touching her bruised lip. For the first time in years, a small flicker of something unfamiliar kindled in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. The widow Rodriguez arrived within the hour, bustling through the door with herbal remedies and clean linens. The older woman's dark eyes missed nothing as she helped Vivian change her bloodied clothes and lie down properly in bed. That man of yours, she muttered in her heavy accent, applying a cooling salve to Vivian's bruised face. He should be here with you, not conducting business. Vivian said nothing. Mrs. Rodriguez was new to Las Cruces, having moved from El Paso after her husband's death the previous year. She didn't yet understand the dynamics of the Owens household, though Vivian suspected she was beginning to piece it together. The cowboy, Mr. Morrison, he is a good man, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, wringing out a cloth in cool water. He seemed very concerned for you. He was kind, Vivian agreed cautiously. Mrs. Rodriguez placed the cloth on Vivian's forehead. More than kind, I think, the way he looked at your husband. She made a clucking sound with her tongue. Like a man who sees a snake in his path, Vivian turned her face away. My husband has been under strain lately. The drought has made the cattle business difficult. And that is why your face wears his handprint. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. I know this story, Nina. My sister lived it for 15 years before her Miguel finally drank himself to death. Tears pricked at Vivian's eyes. She'd never spoken of Thomas's true nature to anyone, had carefully maintained the facade of a loving marriage even as bruises bloomed beneath her high-necked dresses. The shame of admitting the truth felt overwhelming. It wasn't always this way, she whispered. Mrs. Rodriguez's weathered hand covered hers. It never is at the beginning, but a man who would strike his wife after she loses a child, she crossed herself. Such a man has the devil in his heart. They sat in silence as the midday heat pressed against the cabin walls. Vivian drifted in and out of sleep, her body exhausted from grief and pain. Each time she woke, Mrs. Rodriguez was there, offering water or a comforting word. It was late afternoon when the sound of horses announced Thomas's return. Mrs. Rodriguez straightened, her expression hardening as the door swung open. Thomas entered alone, his eyes moving between the two women. Mrs. Rodriguez, I appreciate you tending to my wife in her time of need. It is what neighbors do, she replied stiffly. She needs rest, good food, and gentleness. The loss of a child is hard on a woman's body and spirit. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'll see she gets all three. You must let me pay you for your trouble. That won't be necessary, Mrs. Rodriguez gathered her things slowly, reluctant to leave. She leaned down to squeeze Vivian's hand. I will return tomorrow to check on you, Senora. That won't be necessary, Thomas echoed, his tone sharper. My wife will be fine under my care. Mrs. Rodriguez met his gaze directly. Even so, I will come. The doctor insisted someone monitor her for fever. She turned to Vivian. Rest now, child. God watches over you. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Thomas locked the door behind her. He stood silent for a long moment, his back to Vivian. You shamed me today, he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. In front of Mitchell Morrison, no less. I didn't mean to, Vivian whispered. He asked, you should have lied. Thomas whirled around. Now he's asking questions, suggesting I mistreat you. Do you know what that could do to my reputation? Vivian pressed herself deeper into the pillows. I'm sorry, Thomas, I wasn't thinking clearly. He approached the bed slowly. No, you weren't, but you will remember this lesson, I think. His hand rose and Vivian flinched. Before he could strike, a loud knock rattled the door. Thomas froze, his face contorting with frustration. Owens, open up. Mitchell Morrison's voice carried easily through the wooden door. Thomas smoothed his expression and straightened his shirt. Coming. He called, his tone instantly pleasant. To Vivian, he whispered, not a word. He unlocked the door to find Mitchell standing on the porch with a basket. Behind him, 2 ranch hands waited on horseback. Morrison, I thought our business was concluded for the day, Thomas said. Mitchell held up the basket. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned your wife might need some proper food. My cook prepared a few meals to see her through the next couple of days. Thomas's smile strained. That's uncommonly generous but unnecessary. I insist. Mitchell pushed past him into the cabin. Mrs. Owens, how are you feeling? Vivian sat up straighter, pulling the quilt to her chin. Better, thank you, Mr. Morrison. Mitchell, he reminded her gently, setting the basket on the table. His eyes took in the tension in the room, lingering on Thomas's clenched fists. I thought I might check on you personally. Lost my own wife and child in childbirth some years back. Know how hard it can be. Thomas moved to stand beside the bed, his hand coming to rest possessively on Vivian's shoulder. She tried not to wince as his fingers dug into her collarbone. We appreciate your concern, Thomas said smoothly, but as you can see, we're managing. Mitchell nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Vivian's. I see a lot, Owens, more than most might think. He turned to Thomas, his voice hardening. The doctor mentioned he'd be stopping by again this evening, said something about making sure Mrs. Owens hasn't developed a fever. Thomas's grip tightened momentarily before relaxing. We'll be expecting him then. Mitchell moved toward the door but paused, turning back. Mrs. Owens, if you need anything at all, my ranch is just over the ridge. Send word and I'll come. The offer hung in the air, its meaning clear to everyone in the room. Thomas's expression darkened, but he maintained his composure. Good evening, Morrison, he said pointedly. Mitchell nodded once more to Vivian before departing. Thomas closed the door behind him and stood listening to the horses ride away. When he turned back to Vivian, his expression had changed to something calculating. That man seems uncommonly interested in my wife's welfare, he observed coldly. He's just being neighborly, Vivian said quickly. Like Mrs. Rodriguez, Thomas snorted. Mrs. Rodriguez is a busybody widow. Morrison is a man with too much money and too little sense. He walked to the window, watching as the riders disappeared down the road. Did you know his wife died? Vivian shook her head. No, 7 years ago, childbirth, like he said. Word is he never got over it. Thomas's mouth twisted. Makes him soft on women, I suppose. Vivian said nothing, sensing the dangerous undercurrent to her husband's words. He mentioned he's looking for a wife to help raise his boy, Thomas continued, his tone deceptively casual. Seems he's decided my wife might suit him better. Thomas, that's not be quiet, he cut her off sharply. I saw how you looked at him, like he was some kind of savior. Vivian felt cold dread spread through her chest. Please, I'm tired. Can we not discuss this now? Thomas studied her for a long moment. You're right, you need your rest. His voice softened unexpectedly. I was harsh earlier, the loss, it affected me too. The sudden change in his demeanor was familiar part of the cycle that had repeated throughout their marriage. Cruelty followed by remorse, followed inevitably by more cruelty. I understand, she said carefully. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Sleep now, the doctor will be by later. Vivian closed her eyes, feigning exhaustion though sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. She listened as Thomas moved about the cabin, gathering items, opening and closing drawers. Only when she heard him pour a drink did she allow herself to relax slightly. The doctor's visit that evening was brief. He checked Vivian for fever, expressed satisfaction at her physical recovery, and prescribed continued rest. Throughout the examination, Thomas remained attentive and concerned, the perfect picture of a devoted husband. The doctor left with assurances that Mrs. Owens was in good hands. That night, Thomas slept in the chair rather than joining Vivian in bed. She lay awake long into the night, watching his silhouette in the moonlight, wondering what calculations were turning behind his closed eyes. For the first time since their marriage, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one without fear, without pain, without Thomas. Morning arrived with the sound of roosters crowing from neighboring farms. Vivian woke to find Thomas already dressed, his expression inscrutable as he packed a small bag. "I need to ride to Misilla today," he announced. "Business with the bank that can't wait." Vivian pushed herself to sitting. "Will you be back tonight?" "Tomorrow, more likely." He buckled the bag closed. "Mrs. Rodriguez will check on you, and I'm sure Morrison will find some excuse to intrude as well." The bitterness in his voice made Vivian tense. "Thomas, I've been thinking," he interrupted, turning to face her fully. "Perhaps we should consider moving. Las Cruces has been good to us, but there's opportunity further north. Denver, maybe." The suggestion was so unexpected that Vivian couldn't hide her surprise. "Leave, but your business, the ranch, can be sold. I've had offers." He approached the bed, sitting on its edge. "A fresh start might be what we need, after losing the baby." Vivian studied her husband's face, trying to decipher his true motives. In their 3 years of marriage, she'd learned that Thomas rarely did anything without calculation, and never out of genuine concern for her welfare. "It's so sudden," she said carefully. Thomas reached out to stroke her cheek, the same one he'd struck the day before. "Sometimes change is necessary, don't you think?" She nodded, unable to trust her voice. The thought of being taken further from the few acquaintances she'd made in Las Cruces, further from any potential help, filled her with dread. "Good." He stood. "We'll discuss it more when I return. Rest today. Regain your strength." After Thomas departed, Vivian forced herself to eat some of the food Mitchell had brought. Her body felt weak, but her mind was racing. The threat of being uprooted and taken away hung over her like a dark cloud. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived mid-morning, bringing fresh bread and a sympathetic ear. Vivian found herself confiding some of her fears about the proposed move, though she still couldn't bring herself to speak openly about Thomas's abuse. "He wants to take you away, eh?" Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "Men like your husband, they isolate. It is how they maintain control." "Perhaps he really does want a fresh start," Vivian suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Mrs. Rodriguez made a dismissive sound. "A man who beats his wife after she loses his child does not change his nature by changing his location." She leaned forward, taking Vivian's hands in hers. "Nina, listen to me. There are options, even for a woman in your situation." Vivian pulled her hands away. "What options? I have no family, no money of my own. Thomas controls everything. There are good people in Las Cruces, people who would help." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression became pointed. "Mr. Morrison, for instance." Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I barely know the man." "But he knows your situation. I saw it in his eyes yesterday." The older woman sighed. "Think on it at least, before your husband returns and takes you away forever." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Vivian sat by the window, watching the distant hills shimmer in the heat. Her thoughts kept returning to Mitchell Morrison, to the kindness in his eyes, the firmness in his voice when he'd confronted Thomas. "That wasn't your fault at all," he'd said about the baby. Such simple words, yet they'd penetrated years of Thomas's conditioning that everything wrong in their marriage stemmed from her failures. The sound of approaching hoofbeats snapped her from her reverie. For a panicked moment, she thought Thomas had returned early, but the rider who came into view was Mitchell himself. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback, tying his horse to the hitching post before approaching the door. His knock was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Owens, it's Mitchell Morrison." Vivian smoothed her hair and adjusted her dress before opening the door. "Mr. Morrison, this is unexpected." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair that curled slightly at the temples. "Mitchell, please. I was passing by and wanted to check that you had everything you needed." It was a polite fiction. His ranch lay in the opposite direction, and they both knew it. "You're very kind," she said, stepping back to allow him entry. "I'm feeling much stronger today." Mitchell entered, his tall frame making the modest cabin seem smaller. He glanced around, then asked directly, "Your husband isn't here." "He's gone to Mesilla on business. He won't return until tomorrow." Something in Mitchell's expression shifted. "Good. That makes what I need to say easier." He gestured to the table. "May we sit?" Puzzled but curious, Vivian nodded. They settled across from each other, and Mitchell placed his hat on the table between them. "Mrs. Owens, Vivian," she interrupted softly, "if I'm to call you Mitchell." He smiled, the expression warming his weathered face. "Vivian, then, I'll be direct. I know what your husband does to you." The statement hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Vivian's first instinct was to deny it, to protect the secret she'd guarded for years. But looking into Mitchell's earnest face, she found she couldn't form the lies. "How?" she asked instead. "I've seen the signs before. My own sister lived with such a man for years before we could convince her to leave." He leaned forward. "And yesterday when I arrived. The way he looked at you, the bruises you couldn't quite hide. A man doesn't treat his wife that way after she's lost a child. He doesn't treat her that way ever." Tears pricked at Vivian's eyes. Having her private shame exposed felt both terrifying and somehow liberating. "It's not always bad," she said, the defense automatic after years of making excuses. "He can be kind when things are going well." Mitchell's expression remained gentle but resolute. "That's not kindness, Vivian, that's manipulation." She looked down at her hands, noting the faded bruises on her wrists from when Thomas had held her down 3 nights ago, demanding his husbandly rights despite her pregnancy. "What would you have me do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's my husband, leave him." Mitchell stated it simply, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. "Before he does worse than what I saw yesterday." Vivian gave a hollow laugh. "And go where? Do what? I have no family, no skills beyond keeping house. Thomas made sure of that. Men like him always do." Mitchell nodded grimly. "But you have options. My sister now runs a small boarding house in Santa Fe. She could use help, and you'd have a safe place to stay while you decide what comes next." Vivian stared at him, astonished by the unexpected offer. "You would do that for a woman you barely know?" Something flickered in Mitchell's eyes, compassion, certainly, but perhaps something more. "Let's just say I recognize a good soul trapped in a bad situation." He hesitated, then added, "And perhaps I'm selfish enough to want to see Thomas Owens lose something he doesn't deserve." "You don't like my husband," Vivian observed. Mitchell's mouth tightened. "Few do once they see past his public face. The man has a reputation among those who work with him, unforgiving, cunning, cruel to his animals and workers alike. But until yesterday, I didn't know he extended that cruelty to his wife." Vivian absorbed this information slowly. Thomas had always kept her isolated from his business dealings, presenting himself as respected and admired in the community. "He wants to move," she said finally, "to Denver. He mentioned it this morning before he left." Mitchell's expression darkened. "That's no coincidence. He knows people here are starting to see through him. In Denver, he can start fresh, new lies, new reputation. And new isolation for me," Vivian added, the full implications of Thomas's plan becoming clear. "Exactly." Mitchell reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Which is why you need to decide quickly. If you want help, I can arrange it. Today." Vivian felt dizzy with the possibility suddenly before her. Freedom from Thomas, the thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I need to think, she managed. Mitchell nodded, rising from the table. Of course, but don't think too long. Your husband returns tomorrow, and I suspect he won't leave you alone after that. He moved toward the door, then turned back. I'll return this evening with a wagon. If you decide to leave, be ready at sunset. If not, he sighed. Then I wish you well, Vivian Owens, but I fear for your future. After Mitchell left, Vivian sat motionless at the table, her mind racing. The choice before her seemed impossible: remain in a marriage that might eventually kill her, or flee into an uncertain future with only the goodwill of near strangers to support her. She moved through the cabin in a daze, touching the familiar items that had defined her life for the past 3 years. The blue china plates Thomas had brought from St. Louis as a wedding gift. The quilt her mother had made before consumption took her when Vivian was 16. The small carved box where Thomas kept their savings, locked, of course, with the key always on his person. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Vivian's resolve began to form. She gathered a few essential items: a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the small Bible she'd been given at her confirmation. Not enough to immediately signal her departure if Thomas returned unexpectedly, but enough to start a new life if courage didn't fail her. The sun was beginning to set when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Heart pounding, she peered through the window to see Mitchell driving a covered wagon, his expression solemn in the fading light. This was at the moment of decision. Vivian took one last look around the cabin, her eyes lingering on the bed where she'd lost her baby, where Thomas had hurt her countless times, where any hope of happiness had gradually withered and died. She opened the door before Mitchell could knock. I'll come with you. Relief washed over his features. You've made the right choice. Quickly now, we should be well away before full dark. Vivian grabbed her small bundle of possessions. What about Thomas? He'll come looking for me. Let him look, Mitchell said grimly. By the time he returns tomorrow, you'll be on a stagecoach to Santa Fe, and I'll deny any knowledge of your whereabouts. He won't believe you, Vivian warned as Mitchell helped her into the wagon. He'll know you had something to do with it. Mitchell shrugged, climbing up beside her. Let him come to me then. I've dealt with men like Thomas Owens before. As they pulled away from the cabin, Vivian felt a strange lightness spreading through her chest. For 3 years, that small house had been her prison. Now, with each rotation of the wagon wheels, she was moving toward something new, something that might include freedom and perhaps even happiness. Tell me about your sister, she said as they made their way down the dusty road. The one in Santa Fe. Mitchell smiled, his profile strong against the darkening sky. Madeline is the strongest woman I know. After she escaped her husband, she rebuilt her life from nothing. Now she helps other women do the same. He glanced at Vivian. She'll like you, and what will I do there? I have no money of my own. You'll help with the boarding house, learn the business. Eventually, you might choose another path, but for now, it's a safe place to land. He hesitated. And if your husband tries to follow you there, Madeline's new husband is the town sheriff. Vivian absorbed this information with growing hope. You've thought this through carefully. I've been planning since yesterday, Mitchell admitted. I recognized the signs too clearly to ignore them. They fell silent as the wagon rumbled along the darkening road. Mitchell's ranch lay in the opposite direction from Mesilla, where Thomas had gone, minimizing the chance of an accidental encounter. Still, Vivian found herself scanning the horizon nervously, half expecting to see her husband's figure pursuing them. How long to Santa Fe? She asked after they'd been traveling for some time. 4 days by wagon, Mitchell replied. But you'll take the stagecoach from Las Cruces tomorrow morning. It's faster and safer. And will you come to Santa Fe as well? Mitchell shook his head. I need to stay here, maintain my ranch. And? He paused. It would be better if I'm here when Thomas returns, to direct his anger toward me rather than pursuing you immediately. Vivian turned to him in alarm. That's dangerous. Thomas can be unpredictable when he's angry. I can handle Thomas Owens, Mitchell assured her, though something in his tone suggested he was well aware of the risk. As darkness fell completely, Mitchell steered the wagon off the main road toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. His ranch house was larger than Vivian had expected, with a sprawling porch and several outbuildings. Light shone from the windows, and as they approached, a young boy of about 12 ran out to meet them. "Pa, you're back." The boy stopped short when he noticed Vivian. "Madam," he said politely, tipping his hat in a miniature version of his father's gesture. "Samuel, this is Mrs. Owens." Mitchell introduced them as he helped Vivian down from the wagon. "She'll be staying with us tonight before catching the morning stage to Santa Fe." Samuel's curious eyes took in Vivian's bundled possessions and tired appearance. "Like Aunt Madeline's ladies?" he asked quietly. Mitchell nodded. "Just like that. Now run and tell Mrs. Gutierrez we need a hot meal and the guest room prepared." The boy dashed off and Mitchell guided Vivian toward the house. "My son," he explained unnecessarily. "He knows something of what his aunt does in Santa Fe. Children understand more than we give them credit for." Inside, the ranch house was comfortably appointed but distinctly masculine, with leather furniture and practical decor. A middle-aged Mexican woman, Mrs. Gutierrez, presumably emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Morrison, I wasn't expecting company," she said, her eyes moving curiously to Vivian. "A last-minute arrangement," Mitchell explained. "Mrs. Owens needs a safe place for the night before traveling to Madeline's tomorrow." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Gutierrez's eyes. "Of course. I'll prepare the blue room." She nodded respectfully to Vivian. "Dinner will be ready shortly, Senora." After the housekeeper departed, Mitchell gestured Vivian toward a comfortable chair by the fire. "Rest, you're safe here." For the first time in years, Vivian believed those words might actually be true. She sank into the chair, watching as Mitchell poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to her. "I don't usually." She began. "Tonight might be an exception," he suggested gently. "For the nerves." She accepted the glass, taking a small sip. The liquid burned her throat but spread warmth through her chest. "Thank you. Not just for this," she raised the glass, "but for everything. I know the risk you're taking." Mitchell settled in the chair opposite her. "Some risks are worth taking." He studied her face in the firelight. "May I ask how you came to marry Thomas Owens?" Vivian stared into her glass, remembering. "I was 18, alone after my parents died. Thomas seemed charming, stable. He offered security when I had none." She took another sip. "The cruelty didn't start immediately. It never does, I suppose." "No," Mitchell agreed grimly. "They wait until they have control." By the time I realized who he truly was, we were already in Las Cruces, far from anyone I knew. Vivian's voice had grown steadier as she spoke, as if naming the reality aloud was somehow freeing her from it. "I thought having a baby might change things, make him gentler." Mitchell's expression softened with understanding. "The child you lost." Vivian nodded, tears threatening again. "Our second loss, actually. The first was early last year." She looked up at him. "After each one he was worse, as if my body's failure was a personal betrayal." "That wasn't your fault at all," Mitchell said firmly, echoing his words from the day before. "None of it was." Something in his certainty reached a place deep inside Vivian that had been wounded by years of blame. "I'm starting to believe that might be true." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair. Samuel chatted enthusiastically about his day's adventures, while Mrs. Gutierrez served them with quiet efficiency. The normalcy of the family meal struck Vivian forcibly. This was how a household should feel, peaceful and warm. After dinner, Mrs. Gutierrez showed Vivian to the promised blue room, a comfortable chamber with a large bed and washstand. "There are fresh nightclothes in the drawer," the housekeeper explained. "Mr. Morrison's wife was about your size." Vivian paused in the act of unpinning her hair. "You knew his wife?" Mrs. Gutierrez nodded. "I came to work for the Morrisons a year before she died." Miss Clara was a kind woman, much loved. Her expression grew somber. Her loss nearly destroyed him, but the boy needed his father, so Mitchell found his way back to living. "It's been 7 years, I understand." She And in all that time, he has shown no interest in remarrying, though many women have tried to catch his eye. Mrs. Gutierrez gave Vivian a meaningful look. Until recently, perhaps. Before Vivian could respond to this surprising statement, the housekeeper wished her good night and departed, leaving Vivian alone with her thoughts. Sleep came fitfully that night. Despite the comfortable bed and the knowledge that she was temporarily safe, Vivian's mind raced with worries about the future. What if Thomas found her? What if Mitchell was hurt because of her? What if the new life she imagined proved as illusory as the one Thomas had promised years ago? Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting from the kitchen. Vivian dressed quickly in her one clean dress, pinning her hair in a simpler style than Thomas had preferred. When she entered the kitchen, she found Mitchell already dressed in his work clothes, going over ledgers at the table while Samuel ate breakfast. Both looked up at her entrance. "Mrs. Owens," Mitchell greeted her, rising. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," she answered honestly. "And please call me Vivian. Mrs. Owens feels like someone I'm leaving behind." Something flickered in Mitchell's eyes, approval, perhaps, or admiration. "Vivian, then. Come eat. The stage leaves at 9 and we need to get you into town beforehand." Over breakfast, Mitchell outlined the plan. He would drive Vivian to Las Cruces, where she would board the northbound stage to Santa Fe. He had already purchased her ticket and provided enough money for food along the journey. His sister would meet her at the station in Santa Fe. What about Thomas? Vivian asked the question that had been haunting her all night. "When he discovers I'm gone." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Let me worry about Thomas Owens. You focus on getting safely to Madeline." Samuel, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Pa can handle any trouble, madam. He was a Texas Ranger before he bought this ranch." Mitchell shot his son a look that was half pride, half exasperation. "That was a long time ago, Samuel. But you still practice with your pistol every day," the boy pointed out. This new information about Mitchell did little to ease Vivian's concern. Thomas was cunning and ruthless when crossed, and she hated the thought of Mitchell facing his wrath because of her. "I've left him a letter," she said suddenly, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "Explaining that I've gone and not to look for me. Perhaps it will help." Mitchell took the letter gently. "I'll make sure he receives it, but Vivian, men like Thomas don't easily let go of what they consider theirs." The ride into Las Cruces was tense but uneventful. Vivian kept expecting to see Thomas on the road, returning early from his business, but they reached town without incident. The stage was already being readied when they arrived at the depot. Mitchell helped Vivian down from the wagon, walking her to the ticket office where he confirmed her passage. All around them, the bustle of morning business continued, merchants opening shops, farmers bringing produce to market, children running errands, the ordinary rhythm of town life that would continue without her. "Your ticket is paid through to Santa Fe," Mitchell explained, handing her an envelope. "This contains money for meals and any necessities along the way. Madeline will meet you at the other end." Vivian took the envelope, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." "Live well," he said simply. "That will be thanks enough." The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Vivian hesitated, suddenly reluctant to leave. In the short time she'd known him, Mitchell Morrison had shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. "Will I see you again?" she asked impulsively. Mitchell's expression was complex, hopeful yet cautious. "When things settle, perhaps I'll make a trip to Santa Fe to check on your progress." It wasn't a promise exactly, but it was enough to make Vivian smile. "I'd like that." He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Be safe, Vivian. And remember, none of what happened was your fault." With those words echoing in her mind, Vivian boarded the stage. As it pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of Mitchell standing in the dusty street, his tall figure straight and steady, watching until she was out of sight. The journey to Santa Fe took 3 days, with stops at way stations for meals and brief rest. Vivian shared the coach with various travelers, a salesman with his sample cases, an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives, a young teacher heading to a new position. None paid her much attention beyond polite conversation, for which she was grateful. At night, when the stage stopped at roadhouses for passengers to sleep, Vivian lay awake in unfamiliar beds, her mind alternating between fear of the unknown future and relief at escaping her past. She thought often of Mitchell, his kindness, his quiet strength, the unexpected connection she'd felt with him. It was too soon to name what that might mean, but the memory of his steady presence gave her comfort. The stage rolled into Santa Fe late on the third afternoon. As promised, Madeline Morrison Hewitt was waiting at the depot, a tall woman with the same steady gaze as her brother, though her hair was darker and her face softer. She spotted Vivian immediately, approaching with a warm smile. "You must be Vivian," she said, taking Vivian's hands in her own. "Mitchell sent a telegram describing you. I'm Madeline." Vivian felt an immediate kinship with this woman who had walked a similar path. "Thank you for taking me in." "We help each other," Madeline said simply. "Come, the boarding house isn't far, you must be exhausted." The Morrison boarding house for ladies was a large, well-maintained building near the center of town. As Madeline explained while they walked, it catered primarily to women traveling alone or in transition, teachers, widows, and occasionally women in situations like Vivian's. "My husband James knows what we do here," Madeline confided as they approached. "Being sheriff, he turns a blind eye to the occasional guest without proper papers or a clear past. Some of our ladies are running from difficult situations." "Like I am," Vivian acknowledged. Madeline squeezed her arm. "Exactly, but here you can rebuild." "I did." The interior of the boarding house was clean and cheerful, with a large common room where several women were reading or sewing. Madeline introduced Vivian simply as our new assistant, offering no further explanation of her circumstances. The other women welcomed her with varying degrees of interest before returning to their activities. Vivian's room was small but private, located near the kitchen where, Madeline explained, she would be helping with meal preparation and service. The work would cover her room and board with a small stipend once she was fully trained. "It's not much," Madeline apologized, "but it's a start." "It's more than I had yesterday," Vivian replied honestly. That evening, after the boarders had retired, Madeline invited Vivian to her private parlor for tea. There, with the sounds of the town muffled by thick walls, she asked Vivian directly about her marriage to Thomas. "Mitchell's telegram was brief on details," Madeline explained. "Only that you needed urgent help to escape an abusive husband." Vivian found herself telling Madeline everything from the hopeful beginning of her marriage through the gradual erosion of her spirit under Thomas's cruelty, to the final breaking point after losing the baby. "And my brother stepped in," Madeline concluded when Vivian finished her story. "That sounds like Mitchell, always the protector." "I'm worried for him," Vivian admitted. "Thomas won't accept my leaving easily." Madeline's expression grew serious. "Mitchell can handle himself, and he wouldn't have involved himself if he didn't believe it was necessary." She studied Vivian thoughtfully. "He must have seen something special in you to take such a risk." Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Madeline said softly. "When James and I met, I was still healing from my first marriage. But he knew, somehow, that we were meant to help each other through this life." She smiled at a private memory. "Mitchell is much the same. He sees clearly what others might miss." As the days passed, Vivian settled into life at the boarding house. The work was demanding but satisfying, preparing meals, maintaining the common areas, assisting the boarders with various needs. For the first time in years, she experienced the satisfaction of earning her own way, however modestly. She made friends among the other women, particularly a young widow named Catherine who had fled an oppressive father-in-law after her husband's death. Like Vivian, Catherine was rebuilding her life one careful step at a time. "The first month is the hardest," Catherine told her one evening as they sat mending linens. You keep looking over your shoulder, expecting the past to catch up with you. Vivian nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. Does that feeling ever go away? Gradually, Catherine assured her. One day you realize you've gone hours without that fear gnawing at your insides. Then days. Eventually, you start thinking more about tomorrow than yesterday. 2 weeks after Vivian's arrival, Madeline received a telegram from Mitchell. She brought it to Vivian immediately, her expression worried. "It's from my brother," she said, holding out the paper. Vivian took it with trembling hands, scanning the brief message Owens searching. "Angry but contained for now. Stay alert. All well here. Will write soon." "He's looking for me," Vivian whispered, her hard-won sense of security suddenly fragile. Madeline sat beside her, taking her hand. "But he doesn't know where you are. Mitchell wouldn't have revealed that no matter what." Vivian wasn't so certain. "Thomas can be persuasive. And Las Cruces isn't that large. Someone may have seen me boarding the stage. Even if he discovers you came to Santa Fe, this is a growing city, and you're safe here with us." Madeline squeezed her hand. "James has already been alerted to the possibility of your husband appearing. He won't let any harm come to you." Despite these reassurances, Vivian found her anxiety returning in the days that followed. She startled at loud noises, found herself scanning the faces of men on the street, and woke from nightmares where Thomas found her and dragged her back to their cabin. A week after the telegram, a letter arrived from Mitchell. Madeline brought it to Vivian's room after dinner, leaving her to read it privately. Vivian's hands shook as she broke the seal and unfolded the pages covered in Mitchell's strong, clear handwriting. "Dear Vivian, I trust this letter finds you safe and settling in with Madeline. Samuel asks after you daily and Mrs. Gutierrez has twice reminded me that the Blue Room awaits your return, should you ever wish it. I must be honest about developments here. Your husband returned from Mesilla to find you gone and your letter waiting. His reaction was as expected rage followed by calculated action. He has made inquiries throughout Las Cruces about your whereabouts, offering rewards for information. So far, those who might know have remained silent, whether from loyalty to me or dislike of him, I cannot say. Thomas came to my ranch 3 days ago demanding to know my involvement in your departure. I neither confirmed nor denied anything, which he took as admission. Words were exchanged, some of them heated. I will spare you the details, but know that I remain unharmed, and Thomas left with no more information than he arrived with. The sheriff here has warned him against making accusations without proof, but a man like Thomas Owens doesn't easily accept defeat. I've taken precautions and advised others who assisted you to do the same. I tell you this not to alarm you, but to ensure you remain vigilant. Santa Fe is far enough and large enough that you should be safe, especially under Madeline and James's protection. Still, it would be wise to limit your movements in town for a time until Thomas's search loses momentum. On a more personal note, I find myself thinking of you often, wondering how you are adapting to your new circumstances. Our acquaintance was brief but meaningful to me. Perhaps, when this situation resolves, we might have the opportunity to become better acquainted without the shadow of danger. Until then, know that you have friends here who remember you kindly and wish you well in your new beginning. With sincere regard, Mitchell Morrison. Vivian read the letter twice, her emotions conflicted. The news of Thomas's search was unsettling but not unexpected. What surprised her more was Mitchell's closing sentiments, the hint that he might harbor feelings beyond simple compassion for her plight. She shared the letter with Madeline the next morning, watching as the other woman's expression shifted from concern to knowing amusement. "My brother is not typically so effusive in his correspondence," Madeline observed, returning the letter. "Nor does he usually mention his thoughts quite so." Personally, Vivian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We barely know each other, and yet he risked much to help you." Madeline smiled gently. "Mitchell has kept his heart carefully guarded since Clara died. That he's even considering becoming better acquainted suggests you've made quite an impression." The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Vivian had barely begun to imagine a life without Thomas. To consider a future that might include another man seemed premature, even reckless. "I'm still married," she reminded Madeline. "For now," Madeline agreed. "But there are legal remedies for that, especially given the circumstances of your departure." Over the following weeks, Vivian settled deeper into her new life. The work at the boarding house became familiar, and she developed a routine that brought a measure of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She exchanged several more letters with Mitchell, each one revealing a little more of the man behind the initial gallantry: his love for his ranch, his dedication to his son, his quiet sense of humor. 3 months after her arrival in Santa Fe, James Hewitt brought news that changed everything. He arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual, requesting a private conversation with Vivian and Madeline. "I've received word from my counterpart in Las Cruces," he explained once they were settled in Madeline's parlor. "Thomas Owens was involved in an altercation at a saloon 2 nights ago. Details are still emerging, but it appears he accused Mitchell Morrison of stealing his wife, drawing a gun when Morrison denied it." Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. "Mitchell is fine," James assured her quickly. "According to witnesses, Owens fired first but missed. Morrison returned fire in self-defense and wounded Owens in the shoulder. Not fatally," he added, seeing Vivian's expression, "but Owens has been charged with attempted murder." The room seemed to spin around Vivian. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I should never have involved Mitchell." "Nonsense," Madeline said firmly. "Thomas made his choices. His temper and his refusal to accept losing control over you led to this outcome, not your decision to seek safety." James nodded in agreement. "From what the Las Cruces sheriff wrote, this incident has exposed much about Owens that was previously hidden. Several ranch hands have come forward with accounts of his cruelty, and at least 2 other women have hinted at similar treatment to what you endured. What happens now?" Vivian asked, trying to absorb this unexpected turn of events. "Owens will stand trial," James explained. "Given the witnesses and his reputation, conviction is likely. He's facing prison time." He hesitated, then added, "This development could simplify matters regarding your marriage. With Owens convicted of a serious crime, grounds for divorce would be clear-cut." Divorce. The word hung in the air, both frightening and liberating. Vivian had never seriously considered it possible in their social circle. Divorce was rare and scandalous. But here, in this new life, perhaps the rules were different. "I need time to think," she said finally. Madeline squeezed her hand. "Of course, but know that whatever you decide, you have our support." That night, Vivian wrote to Mitchell, expressing her horror at what had happened and her relief that he was unharmed. She asked directly about his condition and his thoughts on the situation, ending the letter with a question that had been forming in her mind since James's news. "Would it be improper, given these circumstances, for me to consider returning to Las Cruces? Not to resume my old life, but perhaps to testify if needed and to thank you properly for all you've done." His reply came faster than usual, suggesting he dispatched it immediately upon receiving her letter. "Vivian, your concern touches me deeply, but please put your mind at ease. I am entirely unharmed, and the events, while unfortunate, have had the positive effect of exposing Thomas's true nature to those who previously doubted. The trial is set for next month. Your testimony would certainly strengthen the case, though I understand if returning would be too difficult. The sheriff believes the eyewitness accounts from the saloon, combined with the statements from others who have come forward, may be sufficient. As to the propriety of your return, I can only say that I would welcome the opportunity to see you again, under safer circumstances than before. Samuel asks about you frequently, and Mrs. Gutierrez maintains that the Blue Room is just waiting for the Senora to return. Whatever you decide, know that my regard for you remains unchanged. Indeed, it has only grown through our correspondence. With deepest respect, Mitchell the letter confirmed what Vivian had increasingly suspected, that Mitchell's feelings mirrored her own growing attachment, cultivated through months of thoughtful letters. After careful consideration and long talks with Madeline, Vivian made her decision. She would return to Las Cruces to testify at Thomas's trial, staying at Mitchell's ranch for safety. After the trial, depending on the outcome, she would begin divorce proceedings, with James Hewitt recommending a sympathetic lawyer to assist her. The journey back to Las Cruces felt entirely different from her flight 3 months earlier. Where fear and uncertainty had dominated then, now Vivian felt a cautious optimism. The landscape outside the stage coach window was unchanged, the same vast desert punctuated by mesas and distant mountains, but she viewed it with new eyes. Mitchell was waiting at the depot when the stage arrived, Samuel beside him. Seeing him again after months of correspondence made Vivian's heart skip strangely. He looked much as she remembered, tall and steady, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But now she knew the man behind that first impression, his thoughts, his history, his quiet strength. "Vivian," he said simply, removing his hat as she descended from the coach. "Welcome back, Mitchell," she smiled, suddenly shy despite the intimacy of their letters. "Thank you for meeting me, Mrs. Owens," Samuel exclaimed, his adolescent enthusiasm breaking the momentary awkwardness. "Did you bring anything from Santa Fe? Pa says it's much bigger than Las Cruces." Vivian laughed, grateful for the boy's directness. "I did bring you something, as it happens." She reached into her bag and produced a small carved wooden horse she'd purchased from a local craftsman. The man who made this said it's patterned after the mustangs that run wild in the northern hills. Samuel accepted the gift with undisguised pleasure. "It's swell, thank you, madam." Mitchell loaded Vivian's trunk considerably fuller than when she'd left into their wagon. The ride to the ranch was filled with Samuel's chatter about school and his new pony, interspersed with Mitchell's more measured updates about local happenings. Neither mentioned Thomas or the upcoming trial until they reached the ranch house, where Mrs. Gutierrez welcomed Vivian with unexpected warmth. "The blue room is ready, just as you left it," the housekeeper announced, taking Vivian's shawl. "Dinner will be served in 1 hour." She shooed Samuel toward the washroom. "Go clean up, Niño, you're covered in dust from the road." Once they were relatively alone in the main room, Mitchell poured Vivian a small glass of sherry, a gesture she now recognized as his way of marking significant moments. "The trial begins the day after tomorrow," he said, settling across from her. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow to prepare your testimony." Vivian nodded, sipping the sweet liquor. "Have you seen him, Thomas?" "Only at the arraignment," Mitchell answered carefully. "He looks diminished somehow. The wound has healed, but he's lost weight in jail." "I'm sorry it came to violence," Vivian said softly. "That was never what I wanted." Mitchell's expression grew serious. "He gave me no choice, Vivian. He came into that saloon intending to kill me." The blunt statement sent a chill through her. "Because of me? No." Mitchell leaned forward, his voice firm. "Because of his own inability to accept that he couldn't control you anymore. That failure was his, not yours." The familiar refrain that none of this was her fault still brought a rush of emotion. "You've been saying that since the day we met." "Because it's true," Mitchell replied simply, "and I'll keep saying it until you believe it completely." The trial lasted 3 days. Vivian's testimony on the second day was both the most difficult and the most liberating experience of her life. Standing in the courtroom, she recounted the pattern of abuse throughout her marriage, culminating in Thomas's reaction to her miscarriage. Throughout her testimony, she avoided looking directly at Thomas, focusing instead on the sympathetic face of the judge or, occasionally, on Mitchell sitting supportively in the gallery. When it was over, when Thomas had been sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison, Vivian felt as if a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Mitchell found her sitting quietly on a bench, absorbing the reality of her new freedom. "The lawyer says we can file the divorce papers next week," he told her, settling beside her. "With Thomas's conviction, it should be straightforward." Vivian nodded, still processing. 5 years, and then what? Will he come looking for me when he's released? "That's a long time from now," Mitchell said gently. "And the man I saw in that courtroom was broken in ways that suggest he might not have the same drive for vengeance after serving his sentence." "I hope you're right," Vivian sighed, looking out at the bustling town square. "It's strange to be back here where it all happened. I thought I would feel afraid, but mostly I feel nothing for him anymore. No fear, no anger, not even pity, just nothing." "That's healing," Mitchell observed. "The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference." Vivian turned to study his face, this man who had become so important to her through words on paper and now through his steady presence during this ordeal. "What happens now, Mitchell?" He met her gaze directly. "That depends on you. Madeline has told me how well you've done in Santa Fe, how the boarding house has flourished with your help. If you wish to return there, I would understand." "And if I didn't want to return?" Vivian asked, her heart beating faster. "If I wanted to stay in Las Cruces?" Mitchell's expression softened. "Then I would be very glad of it." He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "Vivian, I know the timing is complicated. You're just securing your freedom, and propriety would suggest a longer waiting period. But I've come to care for you deeply, through your letters and now through these days together." Vivian felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from a powerful surge of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now. "I've come to care for you too. More than I thought possible." Mitchell took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be premature for both of us, but I am proposing possibility. A chance to see what might develop between us slowly and properly once your divorce is final." "I would like that," Vivian whispered. "Very much." In the year that followed, Vivian built a new life in Las Cruces, not as Thomas Owens's wife, but as her own woman. With Mitchell's encouragement, she used a small inheritance from her parents, which Thomas had previously controlled, to open a dressmaking shop in town. Her natural talent with needle and thread, combined with designs she'd observed in Santa Fe, quickly earned her a reputation among the ladies of Las Cruces. She took rooms above her shop, maintaining her independence even as her relationship with Mitchell deepened. They courted properly, with chaperoned dinners and Sunday rides, building a foundation of respect and genuine affection that was unlike anything Vivian had experienced in her previous marriage. Samuel became her eager assistant on days he wasn't in school, running errands and charming customers with his earnest manner. Mrs. Gutierrez taught Vivian traditional Mexican embroidery techniques, which she incorporated into her designs to great acclaim. The divorce was finalized 6 months after Thomas's conviction. To celebrate, Mitchell invited Vivian to dinner at his ranch, the first time they would dine alone together, without the technical impropriety of her married status hanging over them. "To new beginnings," Mitchell toasted, raising his glass across the candlelit table. "To freedom," Vivian added, clinking her glass against his, "and to possibilities." After dinner, they walked in the garden Mrs. Gutierrez had coaxed from the desert soil. Under a sky brilliant with stars, Mitchell turned to Vivian, taking both her hands in his. "I've been waiting for this moment," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "Waiting until you were truly free, until enough time had passed for you to know your own mind without the shadow of the past clouding your judgment." Vivian's heart quickened. "And now I find myself more certain than ever." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Vivian, I love you. I've loved you since that first day when you found the courage to tell the truth despite your fear. I've loved you through your letters from Santa Fe, through your testimony at the trial, through this year of watching you rebuild your life." Tears blurred Vivian's vision as Mitchell continued. "I know what marriage should be, a partnership of equals, built on respect and affection. Clara taught me that before I lost her, and I've tried to honor her memory by living those principles. I believe we could build such a partnership together." He paused, drawing a small box from his pocket. "Vivian Owens, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The ring inside was simple but beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that caught the starlight. More beautiful still was the love in Mitchell's eyes as he awaited her answer. "Yes," Vivian whispered, then louder, "Yes, Mitchell, I will marry you." They were married the following spring in a small ceremony in the garden of Mitchell's ranch, now their ranch. Madeline came from Santa Fe with James and their newly adopted daughter. Several of the women from the boarding house attended as well, along with Vivian's customers and friends from town. Samuel stood proudly as his father's best man, his lanky teenage frame nearly as tall as Mitchell's now. Mrs. Gutierrez wept openly as they exchanged vows, later claiming she'd known from the first day Vivian arrived that they were meant for each other. As Mitchell slipped a gold band onto her finger, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate woman lying bruised on a cabin floor to the confident bride standing before family and friends, it was a transformation she could scarcely have imagined that day. Mitchell had first looked at her with kindness and said the words that had begun her healing. "That wasn't your fault at all." Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as all marriages do, but they faced them together as equal partners. Mitchell's cattle business thrived under their joint management, with Vivian's keen mind for numbers complementing his practical knowledge of ranching. Her dressmaking business continued to grow, eventually requiring her to hire 2 assistants. In their second year together, Vivian discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and anxiety. Memories of her previous losses still haunted her. But this pregnancy was different from the start. Mitchell insisted on bringing the best doctor from El Paso to attend her, and the entire household revolved around ensuring her comfort and health. "I'm not made of glass," Vivian protested one evening as Mitchell fluffed pillows behind her back. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," he replied, kissing her forehead. "And not my wife, so you'll humor me in this, please." When labor began on a clear December morning in 1881, Mitchell refused to be banished to the traditional father's waiting place. He remained near enough to hear Vivian's voice, sending Samuel to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Gutierrez to assist with the birth. Their son, William James Morrison, arrived just after midnight, healthy, strong, and announcing his presence with lusty cries that brought tears to Mitchell's eyes when he was finally allowed to enter the room. "He's perfect," Mitchell whispered, cradling the small bundle. "Like his mother." Vivian, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband with their child. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted. "After losing the others, I believed something was wrong with me, that I couldn't carry a child." Mitchell sat carefully on the edge of the bed, adjusting the baby so Vivian could see his tiny face. "That wasn't your fault at all," he said, echoing the words that had first connected them. "And look at what we've created together." As William grew, so did their family. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Clara Madeline, named for the 2 women who had shaped Mitchell's life. Samuel, now in his late teens and preparing to study law in Denver, doted on his younger siblings with protective pride. Life wasn't without its shadows. Thomas was released from prison after serving his full sentence, and the news brought a week of tension to the Morrison household. But reports from Las Cruces confirmed he had boarded a train east immediately upon his release, apparently having no desire to remain in the territory where his reputation was in tatters. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Mitchell surprised Vivian with a trip to San Francisco, something she had mentioned wanting to see since reading about it in Eastern newspapers. They left the children in Mrs. Gutierrez's capable hands and spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the vibrant city by the bay. On their last night, dining in the elegant restaurant of their hotel, Mitchell raised his glass in a toast. "To the bravest woman I know," he said, "who remade her life through sheer determination." Vivian shook her head, smiling. Not alone, I had help. We all need help sometimes, Mitchell acknowledged. But you had to take that first step telling the truth when I asked if you were unwell that day in your cabin. He reached across the table to take her hand. Do you ever think about how different life might have been if I hadn't come by that morning? Vivian considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But then I think perhaps it was meant to be that something would have led us to each other eventually. Mitchell's eyes crinkled with his smile. My practical wife believing in destiny, not destiny exactly. Vivian squeezed his hand. But I do believe that good hearts recognize each other, even across difficult circumstances. Yours recognized mine when I'd nearly forgotten I had one. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room watching the lights of the city below, Mitchell wrapped his arms around Vivian from behind, holding her close against the cool ocean breeze. I love you, he murmured against her hair. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. Vivian leaned back against his solid strength, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. From desperate escape to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a journey of both struggle and joy, but one she would choose again without hesitation. And I love you, she replied, turning in his arms to face him. For seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for showing me what love truly means. Under the vast California sky, with the future stretched bright before them, Mitchell kissed his wife not as a rescuer kisses the rescued, but as equals who had chosen each other freely and would continue choosing each other, day after day, for all the days to come.